So I very much appreciate you guys' time today. We're going to talk about Azure Active Directory, which you guys have all got, and hopefully come up with some ways for you guys to use it that you haven't thought about so far. As Eileen said, I did work in education at Microsoft, so I supported a lot of you guys. I possibly have met some of you because did several roles in education, including account exec, and had a bunch of the Florida colleges. So I've worked with some of you guys. So now I work for Planet, and when I left Microsoft, I kind of, not bragging, but had my choice of where to go. And the reason I ended up with Planet is because they're a Microsoft-only partner. They've been in business for over 20 years, and they let me do this job, which is basically an overhead job at where my goal is to build relationships with customers and help them take advantage of Microsoft in the cloud. Right, so I don't bill for my time. Very rare in a consulting business, or very rare do I ever bill for it. But as a rule, I don't bill for my time. I do presentations like this, or getting on a call and talking about, somebody wants to do ConfigMan or something, and I'm like, well, why don't we look at Intune, right, as a cloud service? So this is kind of the root of everything that Microsoft does with their cloud products. If you have Office 365, you have Azure Active Directory. And the first thing I always say is it has nothing to do with Azure. So you'll say, hey, do you have Azure? And they'll say, yeah, I do. And they'll be talking about Azure AD. The only thing in common with Azure is that it's got Azure in the name. But it is the directory for all the cloud apps within Microsoft. And what we're going to talk about today is, number one, how to make the most of it to make your identity more secure, but also how can you use that as a single sign-on mechanism to go outside of the Microsoft apps and possibly on-premise. I have a couple of schools in Florida that are looking to get rid of Active Directory. And interestingly, I would say about 8 years ago, I made a bold prediction at Microsoft that Active Directory would go away at some point. It's starting to come to that. I knew it was going to take a long time. And it'll still take a long time, especially in large enterprises. But some of the smaller schools are saying, hey, we can do everything that we're doing with Azure Active Directory and Intune and just do everything in the cloud and not have to manage that infrastructure. So I'm hoping to get your brain started just thinking that way. I'm not saying that you're going to do it this year or even next year, but if you can just start thinking that that's where you want to go, because there's definitely advantages to it. So when you set up Azure Active Directory with Microsoft, what you're really doing is just putting the accounts out there in the directory so that they can authenticate cloud applications, or, like I said, on-premise applications. So we can see that, and we're going to dive into this a little more, but we can actually, there's thousands of applications that you can just, with a couple of clicks of a button, set up single sign-on. So I've set up Azure Active Directory to authenticate Office 365. I've got that working. My users are logged into a Windows 10 machine or their phone or wherever, and they don't have to type a password in when they get to Office 365. We kind of take that for granted now, but I can remember a time when that was kind of hard to do, to get set up like that. Now it's fairly easy to get set up. So now I can say, okay, I've got my, my identity ID, whether it's coming from, Active Directory, which is 99% of the time, or it's coming from some other directory. I can then extend that to these other applications, whether they're the SaaS apps that are pre-integrated, or whether I've got to add them to it, or then I could use a proxy to go on premise. So these are a few of the thousands of integrated apps. Somebody mentioned, Eileen, I think, mentioned Canvas earlier. And I think a lot of you guys use Canvas. That's built right into this. So without having to do anything, you find Canvas in the gallery, click on it, and just put in credentials and exchange certifications, and it just works. So within an hour, you can have single sign-on out to Canvas. Without this, you would end up having to do some type of authentication out there, whether it was ADFS or SAML or whatever to get out there, or even sometimes managing a second ID. I know, sometimes there's an LDAP directory out there that people are on there. Matt, I think you guys at your school utilize this to access the library or something. Can you chime in on that?
Yes, so well, we're setting it up now, and this was kind of one of the things I wanted to, why we wanted one of these sessions is because the FLVC is trying to get single sign-on for a lot of their different applications. I think they're moving to that. I don't know that they're moving as quickly anymore after the whole funding issue that they had over the summer, but then before that they were moving to that, and we were working with them for tying our Azure AD to use SSO for all of their applications and stuff. And how it came about was we did not pay for Azure AD Premium. Prior to this, we renegotiated our campus agreement in the spring, and we didn't have Azure AD Premium. So you can access all these apps that are in the app gallery, you can access for free with the free version of Azure AD used to. And so the FLVC integration was not in the gallery because FLVC didn't have it in the gallery. So it would had to be a custom application. Well, the only way you could do a custom application was through Azure AD Premium, which we didn't pay for. So it was an issue. But then we found out when we renegotiated our campus agreement, which I don't know of all the rest of the colleges if you've renegotiated your campus agreement lately, but you now get Azure AD Premium with the new campus agreement stuff. So that was perfect. It was perfect timing for us. And so we paused the FLVC SSO integration till we renegotiated our campus agreement, started beginning of May. And then we started that back up, and then we were able to do a custom application in Azure AD and get that working with them. And we are now looking at our Gensbar student portal, our Mashapola portal, tying it in. Right now, we only have Office 365 and Canvas are the only things, because those were the only ones that were apps in the app gallery. But we're looking to tie in our student portal with our Gensbar student portal with that. And then we're already in talks with the FLVC to tie them in. And then also our Barnes & Noble, they're doing away with something, which is our bookstore, at the end of the year. And so we have to provide an SSO for them, for our students and faculty to log in, and they can do a custom app in the Azure AD. So now having the Azure AD Premium to be able to do custom apps, we are able to expand now. The downside of that is kind of you're putting all your eggs in one basket, as a lot of people found day before yesterday, when Azure AD was down for 4 hours, and so nobody was able to access Canvas and Office 365 and all that good stuff for us. But that is a rarity. Hopefully not something that will continue in the future, and I'm sure Microsoft's going to fix it. But that was one of the things about this session, like I said, is I think all the colleges, if you're renegotiating your campus agreement, you should now have access to AD Premium if you didn't have it before. And now you can do custom applications, which are very easy. I mean, I don't normally do SSO, and the FLVC and the Barnes & Nobles people were able to walk me through. There's like 2 things you put and you give them your certificate. It was very easy. So easy that I didn't feel I needed to take notes on it, because I don't do it that often, and they were able to help me through it. So that's how we're using Azure AD too. So,
and that's a custom one. So that's harder. And you said it was easy.
Yeah, it was even
right.
The app is easy. The apps in the app gallery are even easier, but the custom one is basically you name it, and then it generates you have to have I think the metadata URL or something from the like Barnes & Noble and FLVC. They gave me a link that I put in, and then that generated I think a security key or something that I gave them, and that's it. I mean, it was working after that. We did have to do something with our with the FLVC where we did not have the employee and the student. We have what's called a Gensbar ID, which is everybody's unique ID. It's a number. We're not storing that in in Active Directory locally, which is what we send to Office 365.
Right.
So we had to store that GenSbar ID number for employees and students in AD in the employee ID field, which then FLVC used that attribute in Azure AD to uniquely identify everybody. So that was kind of one thing that I had to do that we weren't doing with our local AD, but I'm definitely interested in getting rid of AD. I don't see how that's one of the reasons why I came to this session. So definitely interested in that and how that would work locally, you know, with not having a local AD, but having it in the cloud. So.
Right. And just so you know, moving forward, you know, my contact info is in these slides, or account exec info. I'm happy to jump on an individual call and even bring in our consultants and talk about how that could work. Right. So we don't have to get into the weeds on this. I went back to this slide because evidently I accidentally clicked twice and skipped it and I couldn't figure out where it went. I wanted to just make sure. I think most of you guys that have Azure AD are probably using ADFS to do the single sign-on part of it, because that's the way it was for years and years and years. In the later versions, probably starting a year or two ago, of Azure AD Connect, which is the sync engine that syncs the identities up to the cloud, it now supports true single sign-on with pass-through authentication without ADFS. So now when we do, and we do tons of Office 365 at Planet, we've done over 5 million mailboxes. And when we do those, we don't do ADFS unless the customer requires us to do it. We just set up Azure AD. And if I've ever worked with any of you, especially back at Microsoft, I probably said, hey, let's stick some of this stuff up in Azure, like a domain controller and Azure Active Directory Connect, the sync engine, put it up there in the cloud, so that that outage that, you know, could happen on your local network. Well, now if you got to put something up there, you can just put Azure AD Connect up there. It's just a simple sync engine. So if you've got ADFS set up and you're only using it for Office 365, you might want to think about just changing it over and getting rid of ADFS, so it's something that you don't have to manage on there. And in this slide, they also talk about password hash sync. Most people don't do that. What that's doing is just taking both your accounts and your passwords and sticking it up in Azure AD, so that, you know, all the authentication is being done in the cloud. It's secure. It's a hash sync. So, you know, your passwords aren't just sitting up there in the cloud. They're hashed. But, you know, most people don't do that. Okay. And then the third way of doing it, which again isn't done very often, but we're doing it for one customer, is, you know, just using Azure AD, you know, and putting the accounts up there with the spreadsheet, right? So that's another way of doing it. So we'll bounce back. I did want to mention, once you get those apps, so Matt was talking about having 3 or 4 apps being used from Azure AD. There is a portal that you can go, that your users can go to and find all those apps. And it can be linked down to the desktop. So it's not hard to find, but you can see where the users can get to all their apps and just click on them and they'll have true single sign-on to them. The other thing is this single sign-on supports anything with OLEFT or SAML. So most, you know, 99% of the SaaS apps that are out there will support it. But if there's something that doesn't, there is a password vault up there. So you can put the password in. I remember one time playing around with it and Amazon was up there, and I just stuck my password for Amazon in there, and I was able to do single sign-on with that. But basically that's just caching the password. It's not true single sign-on, right? It's just a password vault. By the way, if there's any questions, feel free to speak up. We're happy to answer them as we go, because I go through these things quite a bit fast. This is the thing that most people are interested in, or a lot of people are interested in, if they know about it, and that is using the Azure application proxy to get on site. So now I've got, you know, my accounts in the cloud using Azure AD. Okay, maybe I don't even have Active Directory, but the accounts are up there, the passwords are up there, but I still have a legacy app. You know, maybe it's SAP, maybe it's something else that's on premise, and it doesn't make any sense to move it into a SaaS app. I can use the AD app proxy to be able to surface those apps out into that app gallery and allow users to do single sign-on back on premise to get to those apps. And then the second way to do that would be with a networking or delivery controller like Citrix, you know, or F5 or something like that. So there's a bunch of different ways to skin the cat. Another thing that a lot of people don't know is collaboration with external partners. I'd seen this with Microsoft quite a bit, but going to Planet, I did some work with the University of Virginia. They have a huge deployment of Teams up there that they're very proud of, and I needed to go out and do some training for them. And they put a PowerPoint on their SharePoint. And I was like, well, you know, how am I going to get to your SharePoint, right? And they had their AD extended to partners, and they were able to invite me with my Planet address to get into their SharePoint site. So you can absolutely collaborate with other schools, with partners, by extending your AD out to allow them access. And obviously you can secure that. I remember when I had to get it, they had a multi-factor where it actually sent me a mail with a code that gave me access to it. So it can be set up a bunch of different ways.
Just jumping in real quick, talking about multi-factor authentication. You know, that was one of the things for us for tying everything to Azure AD. We were not doing multi-factor authentication, and it's very easy to enable multi-factor authentication in Office 365 using Azure AD. It is kind of the free version of it anyways is kind of limited in terms of, like, you can text, and I think you can call a phone number, and you can use the Microsoft Authenticator app. But you know, that was a cost-effective and easy way for us to get into multi-factor authentication. And by tying everything in there, it's all tied into the same multi-factor authentication too. So that was very helpful for us.
Yeah, hopefully I'm preaching to the choir, but I took all the notes out of these slides because there were just tons of gibberish in there. But one of the notes that was on this slide was that 99.9% of the attacks can be prevented simply by enabling MFA. So number one piece of advice is, whatever you do, make sure your admin accounts have MFA on. It's actually enabled by default by Microsoft now. If you set up a tenant with Office 365, they force you to enable multi-factor authentication. But then once you've got your tenant, then it's your tenant, and you can do whatever you want. As soon as a tenant's set up, the bad guys know it, and they start trying to break in. And you know, they'll just hide a Trojan horse in there and let you get data in there and attack it, right? So number one piece of advice would be to enable it on administrative accounts. Number two, and it's right behind it, I know sometimes it's painful, but enabling multi-factor for everybody, once it's done and it's done right, it's not that hard. It's not a bad user experience. I have an Apple Watch, and this is a geek moment. I'll never forget the first time it ever happened, but I was actually at West Point, and true story, West Point, their passwords are 16 characters. They never expire, but they have multi-factor authentication. And that is the recommended, you know, standard from NIST. Nobody follows it, including Planet. We still change our passwords every 70 days. You know, and I've talked and talked and talked, whatever. But the point is, you know, this is a military academy, right? They're on the DoD network, and they're going 16 character passwords, never expiring, but multi-factor authentication. At the time, it was brand new, so they didn't have conditional access. So every time I logged in, I had to approve it, but I was approving it on my watch. So it was nothing but just clicking, you know, my watch saying, approved, let me in, right? Now they've got conditional access. So if you're on campus at West Point, you don't have to do multi-factor. If you're off campus, you do, whatever. I don't know what the rules are. It's way above my pay grade.
The conditional access is you have to have the premium. You had to have had the premium.
You have to have premium.
So by now that we're getting that in the campus agreement, we are also able to do conditional access, which I haven't set up yet, but I do want to look into. So by renegotiate or the new updated campus agreement, we've got a lot of new features that I think will help a lot of the colleges if they're not using them already. So.
Yeah, and man, I know it costs money to hire us and stuff, but I'm telling you, we can do that in about a third of the time that you can do it, and probably do it better because we do it every single day, right? So, I mean, we can do a very simple engagement just to set up conditional access and DLP for you.
Time is money too.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely. So you can see the different ways. You know, with mine, I use the Microsoft Authenticator, which ties into my Apple Watch. You can also use Hello. If anybody wants to have a geek moment like I did, if you have an Outlook.com account and you set up multi-factor authentication on that, it's actually passwordless. And so whenever I go to Outlook.com, it comes up on my watch. It says, you approved to go in, and then it makes me match up a number, but I never have to put my password in. That's where we're going, is getting rid of passwords. And I love that. I can't wait to see that in the enterprise.
I believe Ron has a question, George.
Sure, Ron.
I just wanted to understand why you guys want to do conditional access. At our college, we make them do two-factor everywhere, including in their offices. And the reason we did that is because we had attacks where we had companies come in and try and attack our users, and we're able to convince them to let them get on that machine. And you know, requiring the two-factor everywhere really raised their awareness of how they have to protect that machine. So I'm kind of wondering why you would want to make them do two different modes based on where they are.
And for us, we probably are not going to do conditional access on the campus. We'll have multi-factor everywhere, like you said. For me, the conditional access also does some other things, more for reporting and for security stuff, where it gives you, like, you can know that if they're accessing it on campus and they're logging in, then that's one thing. But if they're accessing it from Korea or somewhere else, it'll alert you and let you know some things like that. So yes, we're going to have multi-factor everywhere, like you. We're not going to do that for conditional access for, like, if they're on campus, they'll use multi. But the conditional access also gives you access to some other, I guess, geo features.
Yeah, it's on the slide, Matt.
Yeah,
I went to the next slide. So
yeah. So that
exactly
there are other aspects of it besides conditional access.
MFA.
Yeah.
So you can force MFA all the time. Which, Ron, if you can get away with that with your users, that's great. Most of the time, it's hard enough just to get the users to accept multi-factor authentication. So, you know, from a Planet perspective, we don't have a dog in the fight. But if you forced us to do multi-factor, you know, just talk about the Planet employees, right? We're all technical, blah, blah, blah. If you forced us to do multi-factor all the time, we would, you know, be complaining. I don't think we'd quit, but, you know, we would be complaining, right? That's what people face. And so they try, and this is actually even at Microsoft. I was there for a long, long time. And when they rolled out multi-factor authentication, they tried to make it to where if I'm logging in from my house on FiOS every day, you know, using, you know, a Microsoft computer that's got, you know, its own multi-factor on it, then they'll let me in, right, without doing multi-factor. But if I'm up at the coffee shop, then they're going to prompt me for MFA. But going back to Matt's point, there are other things for conditional access. So, for example, you know, we have the geo thing, right? I'm here, but then 2 hours later, I'm trying to log in from France. So you can just say no access, block access, right? You can limit access to different places on the network where they can go. So you can still require MFA and use conditional access to make your network even more secure. So if somebody's, you know, in France, and even if they have MFA, they can't get in. Does that answer your question, Ron?
Yeah, it does. It's
Oh, you turned yourself off. And I can't read lips. You're still muted. Okay.
there we go.
Yes. There you go.
You did answer my question why you would do that. We just found the only problem we had with getting everybody to do multi-factor is people didn't want to use their personal phones
Yep.
to host the app. So we found a card that we could issue, and we only really issued it to about, I don't know, 35 people who were really adamant. And actually, half of them came and asked for the phone because they kept forgetting their card and
I was going to say.
might not be able to work.
Yep. Yep.
So
That's that's hilarious. Okay, awesome, awesome. Okay, so and I've got this is I built this next slide that I think is kind of interesting. So we talked about multi-factor authentication, the licensing, and this is what Matt kept mentioning. There's free licensing for Azure AD. So if you have Office 365, you get it. There's something else, I can't remember, that's the second tier. And I've got the link down at the bottom of this slide that's got all the features of Azure Active Directory and what you need. It's kind of the Bible and what kind of licensing you need to access each one of them. But most of you guys are probably going to have P1 licensing. And then you have the ability to buy P2. So if you've got A3, if you've got Office 365 A3 or Microsoft 365 A3, then you've got P1 licensing, okay? And if you've got A5, then you've got P2 licensing, which is everything, okay? So multi-factor authentication with conditional access requires P1. They have some advanced policies in P2. Self-service password management. I know when I was dealing with education, a lot of people had homegrown password reset tools. If you've got Azure AD and you've got the P1 license, you can set that up, directly into. In fact, even without a P1 license, you can do password resets for cloud. So for Office 365 apps, right? But if you've got the P1 license, you can actually write that password back to Active Directory. So, and it's a nice little portal, works really well. We use it at Planet. I used it at Microsoft for password management. One of my favorite features that a lot of people don't know about is something called privileged identity management. This requires P2, but remember, if you need to buy P2 licenses, you can buy them a la carte and you can buy it per user. And what privileged identity, you guys know what privileged identity management is. What this does is it locks up your administrator account. So in a lot of cases, we'll have, a user that's an administrator and they'll have their user account and then their admin account. Now you've got two accounts out there you're trying to protect, right? So the right way to do it is to have the user with admin privileges when they need admin privileges. So what I always recommend people do is just throw 10 or 20 of these P2 licenses on your agreement and assign them to the administrators so that you can use privileged identity management. And that will allow you to say, this user can go do Office 365 work tonight at 11 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, that privileged access is turned off, right? And you can even go in and say, he can only work on Teams, or he can work on these mailboxes or whatever. And, that's got to be approved by whatever management structure you go on there. So that's a great feature that's built in. Single sign-on, we talked about. It's free for SaaS apps that are built into the gallery, like Matt said. If you want to do custom SaaS apps, you need P1 or P2. And you need that for on-premise licensing too. Password protection is nothing but a list of known passwords that have been compromised. My old one's in that list. And so if I tried to use that, for Office 365, it would come up and say, you can't use this password. It's a known bad password that the hackers already know. More importantly, with P2, you can do vulnerabilities and risky accounts detection. That is where it's out there monitoring all your logons and will prompt up and give you an alert if it sees that your accounts have been hacked, or if they're just risky accounts out there. So just a few extra features that are on there. I did write a blog post on a lot of this stuff that goes into detail and has links for some of these features, and I included that on the bottom of this screen too. And that takes us to the end. So different from the last one, we're not going to run late, Matt. And Eileen, I'll give you back some time. But do we have any other questions? I appreciated that question from Ron. Does anybody else have questions?
I guess a question for Ron I have. You mentioned you are using a card, I guess, for the ones that don't want to use the phones. What is that, what are you using for that? What vendor is that?
It's it's a Prometheus card, and the card is programmable through Bluetooth. So we put it, close to a phone and reprogram it to work with two-factor.
So it gives them a code or something, and
Yeah, it's a rotating code. It's the time-based two-factor authentication is what we're using.
and you set that up in Azure AD. I guess you set up the.
No, it's not an Azure AD. We linked that to our portal, and as well as our sign on to the VMware, so that they can sign on to the terminal session. So when they sign on to a terminal session or onto the portal, they come up and it asks them for a code.
Okay.
Did you look into the cards that Google has that you can just plug into a USB port and gives you authentication?
Yeah, we didn't look at those ones. I don't think they existed when we implemented at the time. And it was really hard to find a programmable card when we went to go implement it. Really, Google Authenticator was really based on using the app. And at the time, I found one company that would allow me to program one of those cards. There was a lot of companies that sold you a system with programmable cards, which had their system to do that. So that's basically how we got the two-factor in place.
I know that Gulf Coast, because due to the Hurricane Michael back in 2018, but when we talked about multi-factor authentications, they used those USB keys, I guess, that went into the computer, and that was
they're called FIDO keys.
Yeah, that was a problem for them because Hurricane Michael hit, Category 5 hurricane, damage to all, I don't know how many buildings on their campus and all that. The people could not get into their machines to get the keys, so they ended up having to, I think, do something different with multi-factor authentication, or even, I don't even know if they turned it off or what they did. But I know that was an issue after the hurricane, because people couldn't get their keys out of their offices, that key out of their computer, and because they were working remotely. And I wonder, I guess that's an issue with COVID. We were talking about the opening session, IT issues, but I'm wondering how that worked with, we had to, in a 2-week period, transition to working remotely and all that. If people were able to go get, I guess they would have to go to their office and get their key or get whatever stuff they needed, and then they, plugging that in. I guess you're able to plug that in. Like if they don't have a college issued laptop and they're using their laptop at their house, I guess they're able to use that key with a like a BYOD device to be able to log in, I'm assuming.
That's the next level of security, right? So, SMS is the worst, and the authenticator is way, way better than SMS. And then those cards, are pretty foolproof, if you've got them, or the numbers like Ron's using. That's the next level of security. I'm really happy that I'm able to do it on the phone. And I will put a plug in for the Microsoft Authenticator. I've probably got 8 different services doing multi-factor with it, and it backs itself up. So if I blow my phone up, which happens every once in a while, I just install it and log in again, and everything comes back down. A couple of the apps, depends on how they've set it up. Like with Planet, I've got to go back in and re-authenticate it, but it works really well.
We had several users choose different authenticators because you can.
Yeah.
And aren't using the Google, they use something else. But
yep. If you've got Android, you might as well just use Google everything, right? If you got an iPhone, you kind of have choice.
I got my iPhone and I use the Google.
There you go. Anybody else have any questions? Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Any questions?
I don't have anything. I was popping back and forth between the 2 sessions, and I came back because I found this one a little bit more interesting.
Awesome.
Yes.
We appreciate that. Well, then we'll wrap it up, Eileen, if that's all right with you. Again, my contacts info's in there. It's not going to cost you a dime to contact me, and I'm happy to jump on a call and just, discuss strategies of utilizing your Microsoft investment. That's my goal. So anything we can help you with, please just reach out.
Thank you so much.
We'll definitely
bet.
contact you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
You too.